Hi. In the background, you can hear the train and probably traffic going on. I'm standing outside of the church office looking at the houses across the street in the neighborhood of the downtown site and thinking about all the ways that we are blessed to be a neighbor and looking for ways to build relationships with our neighbors, whether they be near or far, of course. And some of the ways that we're planning to do that is through the Neighbor Network, an amazing ministry that is getting started. One of the persons who've been in charge of or who has been instrumental in forming our Neighbor Network is Dayton Henderson, and a while back he attended a social connectedness seminar. The presenter told this story about her own neighborhood. In her neighborhood, her husband and she knew a few of the folks. To the left of their house, there was a couple that they frequently socialized with. Across the street, there was a family. They waved, they knew the names, but that was about all. Passed each other and nodded. And then to the right was a woman who lived alone. And they didn't know her by name and barely ever saw her. It was a usual neighborhood. The garage doors went up. The car drove in, and then the garage doors went down. One day, when the presenter and her husband were out grilling meat on their patio, the woman next door, the one that they didn't know, approached the property line, and she held in her hand a patty of ground beef. And she caught their attention, and then she said, "Would you mind if I put my patty on the grill with yours?" And they said, "Sure, come on over." And that from that day on, a friendship grew between this couple and that single woman, but also with the couple on the other side. And pretty soon there was a sense of community growing in the neighborhood. For this sermon series, we've been using a book called Deepening Community by Paul Bourne. And in it, he makes the case for the benefits of being in community. He says we're smarter together. This is what he writes. When human beings gather in groups, a depth of awareness and insight, a transcendent knowing happens that can lead to a profound action. It's something that we call collective wisdom. And then he says community improves our health and our overall well-being too. He references the work of one of the most prominent heart specialists in North America, Dean Ornish. Ornish observed that patients with heart disease who had a greater number of significant relationships in their lives, they lived longer than those who did not. And then he cites a study also of Stanford University. It showed that breast cancer survivors who engaged in a support group for a year, they lived on average twice as long as those who did not. So some significant benefits to our overall well-being in our neighborhoods, our communities, wherever we find persons with whom we connect and care about, and they care about us. Now, I know that this is not surprising to any one of you who is listening to this recording right now. It is important for us as Christians, as a faith community, to be connected to one another. But we know that we can say that it comes from God. As a faith community, what makes it different for us is that we say all blessings come from God, whether it be a neighbor or a hamburger or food, all of it belongs to God. And God calls us to be blessings to one another. As I think about the title, Community of Love, for the first part of our sermon series and small group study, I can't help but go to a story about Rita, a real life story, a person in Canada. Rita lived about a half hour away from town, worked on the family farm with her husband and kids, And it was a normal rhythm of daily life that included milking the cows and tending the garden, raising a family, and keeping the house up. So that would be what her full life would look like almost every day, except on Sundays. She and her family got into the car and went to church in town. And on Mondays, she would go and buy groceries. But otherwise, life was pretty full. And work had to be done, but it didn't stop her and her family from engaging with others around them. Of course, it happened after 8 o'clock when all the chores were done at night. One of the most central influences on Rita and her family was her church community. Both Rita and her husband were leaders in the church, and the kids were involved in youth group. And so the church was not only a place to meet internal needs, but it was also a place to engage with one another, sharing each other's stories, and a place, kind of what you would call a conduit for engaging and helping others. For instance, the men's group that met regularly would every year secure a donated field on which to raise crops, grain, in order to send it through the Canadian Food Grains Bank to feed those who had been affected by famine and war across the country. So all the groups of people in the church community exemplified caring and giving. And they extended that care to one another, helping out at one another's weddings and funerals, taking care of one another when people were sick, and especially even when those who were not part of the faith community, when they got sick. For instance, across the street from the church was a woman who had lots of cats. So she was called the cat lady. And one time she had to be rushed to the hospital. And when she went to the hospital, the doctor said that she could not go back home until her house was cleaned because it was a terrible odor and kind of stinky, a pungent mess. So Rita and several others went into the room and cleaned up. Rita's son had a heart attack, and of course the community rallied. He was in high school one day and a stent malfunctioned, and several people got involved in getting him to the hospital. The miracle of the story, she says, happened during the months of hospitalization. He was in a city recovering about 2 hours away from the farm, which posed complications for a farmer, right? The phone never stopped ringing. Meals were dropped by. Endless boxes of cards and chocolates were sent to the hospital, and some of the family members and friends took the long trip to the hospital from the community so that Rita and her daughter and husband would not be alone. And of course, that all had to happen around people's chores and farming duties too. People even took time off from work to help the family with their spring planting because Rita spent a lot of time with her recovering son. Those kinds of actions that happened from that deep community, those special wishes, those prayers, those caring events made a difficult time so much easier. In Rita's life, the connection between giving and receiving is core. It's critical. It's not just a matter of indebtedness, and it's not even a matter of gratitude, even though there was a lot of that, but it was more a matter of, well, this is just what you do. This is just what you do. This community, that community, shaped and continues to shape them, and it works into everything that they do as a family, as faith-filled members of the community, and as a part of a deepening group of people who care for one another.